Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Vivid Earth. Today, I've got Kenneth Scott back with us, the expert on all law forms, all kinds of law forms, how the world really works from all aspects, law, finance, esoterica, governmental structures, the systems that have ruled this planet for the longest time. He's been studying for, you know, the better part of 35 years. And he's also the founder, for those that don't know, of PanTerra Vida and the GEM University, where he teaches all of this information that he's been coming into over the last 35 years. And today we're going to continue our discussion and talk about, where we left off last time. And we're going to talk about private societies and the value of that, especially moving forward into the new era, since we seem to be pretty close to world peace right now. Um, touch wood. Um, and a few other things in terms of we can see things are shifting. For those of us who have eyes to see, we can see how things are changing and shifting around the world. But that doesn't mean we have to sit back and do nothing. So we're going to talk about all of these things, what we can practically do right now to be sovereign beings and to protect what we have, to make sure we are decentralized moving forward, so that as a civilization, we will never be caught in a parasitic system again where we will be enslaved without even knowing it. Welcome, Scott. I keep calling you Scott. Ken,
It's
how are
okay.
you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, we just had a little bit of a delay with starting, but it's wonderful having you back.
Thank
So
you.
maybe jump in wherever you feel appropriate on, that little opening line, and we'll take it from there.
hmm Well, that's a good curveball you just threw at me. Where do I start? The the evolution of my work since I started studying law, inching into the study of law around 1990. So you were accurate, 35 years, going into 36. Um, has been a combination of studying the historical basis of law, the world system, of course, the monetary system, and all related things that bind or control the population under the auspices of legal or lawful authority, and looking at the elements in law and in the historical record of what actually put in place what I would call universal principles. And they are universal, they are timeless, they are maxims that endure through the course of time. And above that, or overlaid on top of that, is all the legal machinations, the whole system, which we go into extensively in the conversations you and I have had so far, and what we go into in GEM University and PanTerra and all of that. There are obviously two conflicting pathways. One is towards centralization and bondage and control. The other is towards breaking the shackles of that control, breaking the bondage, and seeking to be able to live in what people like to call freedom, to be free. And, how can we are in the system. We were born into the system. We were born at a time when the system was basically finalizing the last coats of paint and the last little trim to achieve what we're watching attempting to be finalized at this time. And at the same time, we know, you and I, many beings like us who we work with, we know, or we watch on the internet and so forth, that we precisely came into the lifetimes that we are now living to break that apart. But we have a maxim in PanTerra, which is the only way out is in. I've observed a lot of people who just think that they can just disconnect and go away hide in a cave, live in a cave. And for the most part, a few of them have achieved that, but lived separate, isolated lives, some literally living in a cave, some living in their car. Speaking of the United States and the law and so-called freedom movement, and that never worked for me. So I was looking for real solutions. How can we learn and integrate and understand pretty much fully the condition we're in? And that has so many permutations. It has permutations in multidimensional sense. It has permutations in physical reality sense, you know, legal, monetary, structural things. And I know from my experience, my observation, my education, that we can't live separate from the larger whole, and that what we're moving towards is a balance between individual freedom, you know, whatever you want to call it, sovereignty, freedom of expression, while at the same time being part of a larger whole that's synergistic and integrated as a whole. And I think it's quite obvious now that those two directions of centralization and control and decentralization and freedom are coming up against each other, sort of the end of a large cycle of time to see where it goes. And is it going to be one or the other, or are we in a bifurcation where they're going to exist parallel and simultaneously while separating from each other? I'm sure you would agree that we're bifurcating and we're living in at least two realities in this world, if not a lot more. Um, the issue is always the ones who want centralization and control are not letting go easily. You know, we're happy to have them go control who wants to be controlled while we are left alone, but in community, so we live together or interconnected through a larger worldwide community or a continental community, but working, you know, locally or regionally. We just want to be left alone. The issue is they don't want to leave us alone. You know, it's all or nothing for them. So all that being said, that's been my work for 35 years, is to really delve deep, dive into the depths of the belly of the beast and learn exactly what it's about, to understand and see how it works, how law works, how universal principles that we could call universal law have been emerging for us to take up and embody and hold and manifest basically in our lives within our communities, and having models that we can do that with that are not, you know, going up against the current world model, but utilizing the building blocks of that world model to our benefit. And this is what we've done. This is what my work's been about. And it has essentially been very successful. PanTerra was formed and founded close to 24 years ago. And while many of the people I was working with, studying with, collaborating with, or studying under over the last 20 to 30 years, many of them went to jail, went to prison, had their lives upside down, destroyed. I synthesized and integrated the concepts that we now are working with in PanTerra, teaching and teaching others to work with and apply in their lives. And we've essentially been left alone. And so that comes from a mastery of the law. And we're still dealing with a lot of recalcitrant players in the system, rogue elements. We can go into that a little bit. I won't go into detail right at this moment, but the things that I have always applied, things meaning applications of process and documents and administrative processes that work very effectively over decades, sometimes now still work very effectively, and sometimes just absolutely come up against complete rogue, you know, we don't care at all how aligned you are with the law, your process, your whatever you're doing. we're just going to walk over it. So there's this breaking down of alignment with the law at different levels of the system. And that's one thing that I learned a long time ago, which is the system is designed as a pyramidal hierarchy. And so when you're dealing with the lowest level, the players and the actors at those levels, whether it's in the tax system, the judicial system, the policing system, that they're largely quite ignorant. They're very programmed. They're programmed in a niche that gives them a sense of power and authority, and they're not going to let go of that no matter what. And so, I can't speak for South Africa or other countries. We do work with some of our members are in South Africa and Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and we're still dealing with those systems. My main ability is to speak about the US system. And so we are coming up against that. There is a crescendo point right now where individuals or groups that truly know the law and are applying it are coming up against the breakdown of the system and the individual actors, the rogue elements who are tenaciously holding on to their petty tyrant territory. And but when you know the law, and as our conversation goes on, whether it's today in this one or future conversations we have, I can get into very specific detail of what I'm talking about because it's important to know that what I mean when we're applying the law and when you really know the law and you apply it, what happens when they ignore it and they walk over it. In the past, they've been able to get away with that because the whole system supported them. Well, the whole world system is collapsing, led by the the events going on in the United States, but then given the U.S. and its relationship with Europe, with Russia, China, blah blah blah. So ultimately, it does come down to the individual process. We talked about last time the two pillars, the ancient symbol of the two pillars, the line of the king, the line of the priest, the line of the priest being the control of the law and the indoctrination and the overlay of the law from the priesthoods, whether they're religious priesthoods or legal priesthoods or money priesthoods, medical, and that in the model that we have developed in PanTerra, it's about taking the law back, and this is what has evolved in our work, the court of the people that I've worked on for decades to synthesize law forms and integrate it into a form that actually really holds universal principle and removes our attachment to the law of the priest and returns it to the people. That then gets into personal process, healing processes, multidimensional contexts and issues. A lot of people have said to me, okay, yeah, you've created this law form, this jurisdiction, PanTerra, court of the people, and all of that, but it's minute. It's not even, it's a fraction of a minuscule part of a minute, few hundred people compared to billions. But that's where it gets into the energetic. We can't let that issue of scale stop us from doing what we're here to do, which is embodying our living presence, our universal capacity, universal law, which is way more powerful than anything of man-made institutions that are based on rogue elements, domination, control, and all the rest of it. And I have seen tangible, real effects of that in our experience and what we do. So, so back to your question, private societies, what does that mean? Well, it's a matter of using what exists in the world system that were building blocks that were designed to be centralization and dominance and control and flipping it over, rearranging it so that we are actually lawful. We don't polarize with the world system, their legal and monetary system. We actually honor it because this is part of the way the system is set up. You know, the whole monetary system is based on commercial code, uniform commercial code. And there's basic fundamentals in the UCC, which is a matter of staying in honor or going into dishonor. So, are you familiar with the UCC and how that works or how
Yeah.
it was set up?
Yeah. But feel free to expand a little bit on that.
Okay. Well, let's start with this. Tell me what you understand about it.
Uh, now you're putting me on the spot. Well,
Yes.
doing my years of studying common law, it's something that's come up a lot, the Universal Commercial Code. Um, I um, it's kind of the foundation upon which a lot of these law forms have been built, right? Um,
No.
okay, well then,
Okay, so
rather you
let me,
explain it to us.
yeah, I will. Sorry to put you on the spot. um, so Uniform Commercial Code is a restating of essentially a longstanding historical structure. It's not even per se law. And so you mentioned that, well, in studying common law, then, you know, and you're not alone. There's probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people trying to study law and understand it. And they go often to one of two things, either uniform commercial code, and they say, well, it's commerce and I can figure out how to do that. There's a lot of people teaching that, teaching in quotes on the internet and saying, this is the answer, this is what you do. You know, do this, this, and this with the UCC system, process codes, and all of that, or they're going to common law. This is why I talk about that the law form that has evolved through my work and the implementation through PanTerra, the Court of the People, and so forth, is a synthesis and an integration of multiple law forms. That's how the world system works. If you go into court, the judge, the prosecutor, whomever, the bar attorneys, are at least the way they've been programmed and trained. They're walking through two, three, four, possibly even more law forms right there in the same court. So you think you're in a court of law, but you're in admiralty, and admiralty is dealing with bankruptcy, and bankruptcy deals with civil code, which is Roman civil code, things like that. And is there even law anymore? No, not really, not in their courts and their systems. So what we teach in PanTerra is to really truly know what each law form, what it is, what it does, how it functions in the world system, how it offsets or not offsets, but how it integrates off of or stands complementary or integrated with the other law forms. This is very important because otherwise you're lost. If you think you're in commercial code and or that's part of the common law or otherwise, and you don't know how they work individually or integrated whole, you will not be able to withstand what these trained actors and agents know about them. So, Uniform Commercial Code is something that essentially emerged over the last 100, a little bit more, 150 years, say. It goes back to Rome. It goes back to the ancient European Roman world and even pre-Rome. It's essentially the how uh, people who move from one geographic area, which you would call a jurisdiction, to trade with other jurisdictions. And the primary method of that was over the sea. So, and then it had to do with cargo in a ship and things called a manifest or a bill of lading or bills of exchange. So, if a captain of a ship who was hired by some manufacturer, producer of wine or oil or some other product wanted his products to be shipped by this captain in his ship across the Mediterranean, How was he going to be secure and be paid? How was he going to secure his product? And when the ship captain delivered that product in a foreign port, how were they going to be safe in leaving that product, selling it to somebody, and taking something back? Of course, if you traded substance for substance, a ship full of cargo for silver coins, that makes it easy. Okay. But what happens when it gets more sophisticated and you have to have documentary instruments that provide the security, enable that exchange of product for payment and things like that? Well, that became known in Rome as the lex mercantoria, which basically means law merchant. So it had to do with merchants. It had to do with mariners, those who were, plowed the seas, not plowed, but, plied the seas in ships, and their property, and the ability to deal with secured interest, and a creditor and a debtor. So that existed thousands of years ago. Roman civil law, which is essentially the law of conquest, military conquest, existed thousands of years ago. We still have all of that here today. We're still dealing with Admiralty Maritime and its derivatives, which include civil codes, which interface with Roman civil law, which is the law of military conquest, and how populations and property are controlled through civil codes and integrate military conquest, issues of domination through monetary domination, bankruptcy, and things like that, and how goods and services attached to secured interests, collateral, and obligated parties that we would call debtors, how all of that's going to work. So if you study the UCC, it's broken up into chapters, and it has different functions relative to what I've just generally described. Okay, so our entire monetary system now is based on the Uniform Commercial Code, because what we call money are just circulating commercial paper instruments that are controlled by the Uniform Commercial Code. It has nothing to do with law. It has to do with the exchange of paper called bills of exchange, so that that paper can be negotiable, which means that I can give you paper negotiated forward. You become the holder of that paper and you give me something back for it. So that's the essence of the UCC. And it was basically begun in the 1930s in post-bankruptcy United States after March 1933. And it became universal or uniform completely with all of the states, which are now bankrupt corporate subdivisions of the United States Bankrupt Corporation, by 1966. And then it became internationalized through international agreements, monetary agreements, and all of that. And ultimately, not a surprise, it's all controlled by the Vatican. Okay. There's something called UNIDROIT, which is just capital letters. It stands for an acronym, UNIDROIT. That's what controls international relationship between banking, nations, monetary exchanges, and all of that. And then it filters down to the domestic level and how that's controlled in the US or South Africa and all the rest of it. And, so everything leads back to Rome. And it's all about uniform rules of how things are going to be done within their play box, their sandbox, to control goods, services, money, and equity in the production of the people. And we've all heard of people who are pursuing, want to understand law and so forth. We've all heard about the birth certificate and how that is binding to us and whatever. It's all integrated with all of that. So, So yeah, I don't know where to go from there, but that basically describes that. And it's, the Uniform Commercial Code does not have anything to do with law, as law is properly defined.
Hmm. Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, that definitely clarifies it. I'm interested to know that, as the monetary system change, how is that control system going to change? Because ultimately it needs to get away from the Vatican control, right? Uh, I'm sure these are things that they are working on. I mean, we know
Yeah.
that things like the SWIFT system and all of these things are going to change, but essentially the very thing that governs it, how is the powers shifting with regards to that? Will the UCC, still be in place in another form? Will it
hmm
morph? How do you see that evolving?
I don't know the ultimate answer to that question. I'm still watching it play out. What I thought was absolutely cut and dry and clear 1, 2, 3 years ago um, is not so clear anymore. um, Now, there's a lot of, I mean, we're definitely at the crescendo point or the conversion point of all the factors of the world, World War III that's been going on for decades. Started in the 90s, you could say World War III started in August, September of 1945. You could say World War I and World War II is just another 30 years war, like happened in the 1600s. And then you could say World One, Two, and Three is just another 100 years war. I mean, it's a continuum, and so the clash of civilizations or the clash of ideals between centralization, dominance, and control versus decentralization and freedom, we're really, really right in the midst of it, as is obvious to people who pay attention. Um, and what I, th- and so, we can look at things happening right now today, such as the so-called peace agreement between Israel, Gaza, United States, and the Middle East. Is that real, or is it just part of the, bait and switch and misdirection and the same old agenda moving towards its conclusion? I used to be pretty strongly aligned with thinking that Trump was truly there for what he has said he was there for liberating the people, returning the power to the people. There's some big questions I have right now about that. As soon as he was in office, he starts going heavy, heavy into AI and cryptocurrency and all
I
of that.
think I think with regards to that is I believe AI is inevitable. There's no way of stopping it. We are moving into the future. It's about who controls it, first of
Right,
all, and how you
exactly.
manage it. So the first thing you had to do is take control of the
Right.
biggest AI organizations. And when I say take control, it's not what we think. I believe that through Executive Order 13818, i.e., crimes against humanity, those
hmm
organizations were actually literally taken over. And the investments that they are making are investments that they are engineered to make in order to
hmm
expand a system that's going to be ultimately for the people, because that's a
Yeah.
very dangerous thing. If I was if I was president, that would be the first thing I would address going into office, because you allow AI to run rogue, you can forget about getting control of the planet. It's
Right. No, I know exactly. And that's where it's literally a split reality. What the second part of what I was going to say, and that's well and good what you just said, and I agree with it. But then the second part of what Trump seems to be completely all in 100% is this whole thing centering around Israel. And so is Israel going to be in control of a world system of AI and centralized monetary and legal control and all of that? Or is this a bait and switch relative to the dark side, the deep state, to make it appear that that's what Trump is doing in supporting that, and it's going to switch relatively soon. And that's where I say, well, let's just see how it plays out. Whatever you and I or others think about it, we don't really have control over it. And so there's a macro scale of events that are going parallel, they're converging, they're bifurcating, and we're right in the middle of it. The thing about AI that's really important, this is my perspective, I believe it to be very solid and real, is it never has not been here in this world system,
Yeah.
in this planetary, for many, many eons of time, which gets into the whole subject of cycles and resets and harvesting and looping, and how harvesting the human population to be the battery source, as in the Matrix, to feed off of, to build up world civilization over millennia and get to a convergent point, collapse it, use these systems, AI, directed, controlled, legal and monetary and so forth, binding the flesh by acquiescence, by consent, manufactured consent or voluntary consent of the majority of the people, and then basically just collapse it because it has an inevitability of a loop cycle that always has collapsed, and and then everything goes back to the beginning while the elite go underground and they last out what's going on, chaos and mayhem and destruction on the surface until it all quiets out, and then they start over again. So AI and the technology, it appears like it's emerging. It's been here all along.
And not
And
just on Earth, but throughout the entire universe.
yeah.
Ancient alien AI has been, you know,
Hmm.
a reality for a very long time.
Yeah. So the big question is who is going to control it? Because, excuse me, as you just said, it's here, you know. Um, you know, we're in the new world order. We're in the metaverse. We're in a completely controlled AI system. But we are still truly sovereign beings. We have sovereign free will. We have sovereign integrity. We have the power to withdraw consent and negate a presumption of consent, which really gets back to how one um, stands within a completely controlled system, because they who would like to control everything and everybody are also bound to universal law. And the primary in this reality is that we have sovereign free will. And so when I use the phrase manufactured consent, that's what it is. People think they have to do this, this, and this, and by doing that, they basically are,
Consent.
giving their consent.
Yeah.
So another part of what we really emphasize in PanTerra and teach and do and work together with is how to stand in your living capacity to, in every act, every word, every interaction, not give consent. And that does work if you know what you're doing and if you know the law.
Hmm. Well, I think there's a few things there. Firstly, I believe we are in the fog of war. We're not
Mhm.
seeing things clearly. Things are
Right.
being said on the world stage. Moves are being made that we don't quite fully understand right now. Because if we knew what was going on, the enemy would know what's going on as well. That's number one. Number two, the world is so brainwashed. You can't just rip the plaster off and change everything because, we're going to see civil war because people are so entrenched in their systems and their belief systems that they're not going to understand what's going on or what is being attempted. So that's the one thing. I think with regards to Israel, I mean, we know that, obviously it's not Israel, the people. We're talking more specifically about Mossad, who's also created Hamas. So, it's two sides fighting of the same coin. So
Right.
could there be good military forces within Israel that were used to clear out, the Gaza area? Because I think in terms of tunnel systems and everything that's been going on underground there, it's horrendous and it's enormous. But we don't fully know. We can speculate, we can, use our intuition and our inner knowing. We don't fully know what's going on. But, as we started off saying, there is a bifurcation going on this planet. The other thing is that we are quantum co-creators of our reality. So the
Mm-hmm.
wave only collapses into a particle once it's being observed. And how do we observe that wave? What is it? What is the filter and the lens through which we look at that? And do
Mm-hmm.
we do we do we look at the situation as a glass half full or glass half empty? Number one. And number two, we are the conscious co-creators of this new reality. And it's a difficult thing uh, to really wrap our minds around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same idea as being victimhood. Oh, we don't have anything, we can't do anything. It's just all happening out there, and we will just have to see how it all plays out. Um, so I just really believe we have more power than we think. We have more creational power than we think. And we have to
Mm-hmm.
start exercising that and build uh, the version of Earth that we want to see. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not always, yes, action is important. And there are people that are the builders of physically new systems, new structures, which you are doing as well. But it's also using our minds as a tool to co-create what this new system looks like and saying, you know what, we can look at this as a potential, or we're just being led down the garden path and it's all just going to lead us into the abattoir and we're going to be lambs to the slaughter. Or
Mm-hmm.
we believe there is something going on that there's a good version of there's a decentralized system that is being born that we can open our minds to and we can start imagining and putting thought and emotion together, add action to it, and start co-creating that without physically having even to do that much. It's a creational process that works on a quantum level, if you will, where um, it happens in the minds, first of all, more than anything. So that's kind of a little bit how I see it. I'm a eternal optimist, you
Hmm.
could say.
So am I.
So I do believe good things, and I don't think we can stop AI. I don't think we can stop the digitalization of our money systems. With regards to cryptocurrencies and developing a system that is truly decentralized and cannot be controlled by a government or a specific form. And I'd be interested to how does that work with the UCC? If it's completely
Mhm.
decentralized, I can trade with you, let's say XRP, and I can pay for services and you can buy something from me. It's completely decentralized. Nobody can interfere with that transaction. Um, how does that fit
Yeah.
into the UCC as such? And does
Well,
that
if you,
fall? And could the UCC actually be flipped around, usurped from its Vatican control and utilized? Because that's also a bit that what I've seen. Certain systems you can't just remove from the planet because there'll be chaos. So
right. Yeah.
overtake, re-engineered, designed, and perhaps laid to rest in a gentle way in a few years' time when new rails are in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, well, in the process of universalizing, implementing uniform commercial code, um, to um, to become the undergirding or the foundational structure that controls money. That basically was the primary intent of the design, to centralize the system and control. Obviously, money controls, at least at this time in this historical continuum, everything that is essential for living beings, which is primarily what we call humans, bipedal beings in these DNA suits, but also animals, plants, the land, the soil, everything that builds life, the sustaining and the enhancing of life. Money is the underpinning of all of that. So and it's not a single point of focus. It's like what I said earlier, and I say often and repeat it over and over again. It's interrelated. You can't separate one from the other. You can't separate military conquest, Roman civil law, the civil codes, the way the judicial system is based on admiralty rules of bankruptcy and military conquest and control, all of those things. It's a vast subject, and this is what you have to slowly and steadily learn the piece, learn how the piece fits in the bigger puzzle pieces, and then how it's all interconnected. So in the United States, uniform laws started being implemented in the 1930s after the country was officially, formally, as far as international law, in a bankruptcy reorganization structure under full military foreign conquest based on international treaties and conventions in The Hague and the World Court and all of that. So in the US, and I'm sure it's the same in your country and many countries, there are uniform acts. So in the US, I'll just speak of the US, there's many, many, many uniform acts that all states adopt. So there's a central place where these uniform acts are structured and designed and perfected, and then basically it's spread out. And theoretically, all the 50 states in the United States have sovereign integrity, sovereign authority, but they don't. They're all bankrupt corporations under subdivisions of the master corporation. So they were required to adopt those uniform acts. It has to do with everything, the motor vehicle code, driver's license, everything. And But as far as the UCC from 1933 to 1966, a very short span of 33 years, by 66 there was a federal act which is called the Revised Federal Lien Registration Act, and in that act is a line that says, henceforward, all matters pertaining to taxation and monetary policy of the United States shall be under the purview of the Uniform Commercial Code. So it attached everything, those two things, taxation, which is really a form of use, which gets back to, more ancient. There's an act in, I think, 1536 in London, in Britain, called the Statute of Uses. Well, that has to do with trust law and the ability to have one owner give a right of use to somebody else. That's called usufruct, and that's in the Civil Code. And so the use of what we call money, these private instruments that have underpinning of the UCC, that have secured interest and a debtor and collateral, well, that gets into the bankruptcy of the United States, which has to do with the Federal Reserve, because it became the bankrupt creditor against the United States that became the bankrupt debtor, and the securing, besides defining the UCC as the rules of merchants, mariners, and their property, you can also boil it down to a very simple triangle, which is secured parties, debtors, and the collateral that the secured party is secured by. So the entire monetary system became one vast commercial bondage attachment of the secured party, that was the Federal Reserve and its private owners, as the creditor against the bankrupt United States as the debtor, and the whole structure of central banks and the issuance of UCC-bound monetary units called dollars or rand or pesos or whatever, basically was distributed through the whole world to bind the people and all their production, everything we create 24/7 around the clock and around the world, excuse me, to become the bonded collateral against the debt. And the whole purpose was to build this vast level of unsustainable debt, collapse it, and have the creditors claim the liquidated damages against the secured property, being the people, the persons, and the property of the entire world. And that was the agenda. So now, what system or what transitional phase are we in? Well, we're in the phase where the bankruptcy that was going to end up being a perpetual debt enslavement system by collapsing the system and claiming the collateral, the people, and all their property and production as the liquidated damages, that was flipped over the last 10 years. And yes, there are good intention people, teams, alliances, a global military alliance, and so forth, that have the intent and are implementing that intent to break those shackles and chains of bondage through the monetary and legal system. So in that sense, the ideal of seeing the transition going from the current Federal Reserve System to a global, somewhat decentralized, but also centralized system is, directed by the AI system based on the basic fundamentals we've talked about, sitting or moving on blockchain, and being able to move instantly. And, we're watching the last phase of the battle between centralization and decentralization. Ideally, the technology that's been created over the last 30 years with computerization, the internet, blockchain, digital currencies, and all the rest of that will liberate the people, that the people will have the ability to be in control of their buying capacity, aka money, so that they can buy and build with what they buy the things that create good lives. Food, water, medicine, energy, housing, shelter, education, health, and all the rest of that. So again, getting back to the basics where we started from, it is my strong position that what I have modeled by using what existed in the system for hundreds and hundreds of years, the fundamental building block of nation states, which is a society, that we have the power in law without rebutting their law, the control system's law. Well, you created societies and you took that a society as the foundation of building a nation state. You have your rules called the law of nations, and you've come together to create a united nation system with united centralized banking, IMF and BIS and all the rest of that. We, the people, have the same capacity. We don't need your authority. We don't need your permission. So all the people who think they're doing common law or variations on that, who still are operating through corporate entities and don't know how to structure things, how to layer those, even if you have to use a corporate entity like an LLC, limited liability company, where does as the saying goes, where does the buck stop? Who is in the system today, you have a phrase called the ultimate beneficial owner. It used to be when I started in all of this in the 90s and into the 2000s, you could create an entity, a trust, or even an LLC, and then layer it so that a trust has beneficiaries. It has a trustee. Well, you could set up the beneficiaries to be another set of trusts, which then could go international to be ultimately held by a foreign entity that was completely private, and all of that. Well, they've completely broken that apart. They've used terrorism, know your client, anti-money laundering, rules of compliance to break that apart. So where I came through in the 90s, 2000s, and I saw what we could do back then. We were able to bank, we were able to do all these things, and it conformed with the law. Okay. But then the banks started saying, well, we won't let you do that anymore. And we would say, well, is that the law? And they said, no, but it doesn't have to be. It's our corporate policy. So you either follow our policy or you don't. play our game in our sandbox, you know. So that required over the last 20 years figuring out new ways to deal with that. That refined my ability to work with the law, but still maintaining the ability to be fully compliant and transparent, but fully private and protected. So this got back down to where we started, the fundamental of a building block, which is the law of the people, the fact that a society has the ability and authority within world law to establish its own jurisdiction, its own law form, its own court, its own ability to interface with other lawful systems, whether private or public, and have its own treasury and monetary issue. And we've been going through layer upon layer of both refining that and dealing with so many people, hundreds and hundreds, really thousands of people who've come through PanTerra who at first say, well, I'm really into what you're doing and I want to be part of it and blah, blah, blah. But they're so hardwired in the mind, in matrix thinking, that they can't actually let go of the programming that they've been indoctrinated into from birth. And the primary program is what's in it for me. That's the biggest issue that we've experienced and seen, which is people cannot let go of individual self-control, self-aggrandizement, and actually cooperate in a unified field while still maintaining sovereign integrity. And this is what we have evolved and refined over 30 years, how to actually achieve that and still follow the law and not be attacked by the law. When I say the law, the legal system, the Roman
Yeah, you're
civil
not fighting
system.
it. You're just living parallel to it and in harmony with it, but separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this technology driven by or controlled by AI, we have the power of creation. We are co-creators, as you said, to create and direct that system to serve life. And that's the bottom line. Okay. There are many beings who have contracted with less than desirable forces who are attempting to implement the hierarchical pyramid control system to force compliance. And I mentioned earlier the pyramid or the hierarchy of institutions in the world, whether judicial, taxation, monetary, whatever. And the lowest level of that pyramid are the programmed actors who are slotted into a very limited program of this is the rules. You have to make those people conform to the rules. And what we're watching when I talked about the rogue elements going on right now is a lot of those individuals who basically sold their soul for their position, you know, whether it's a county clerk, a clerk of court, a judge, a prosecutor, whatever, and they're vigorously holding on to something that is at this point it's an anachronism. It doesn't fit in this time reality that we're in. They still think they are petty tyrants and they've been given the authority to control at the lowest level. And one of the first things that I learned in going through the law process, learning it, was that you don't get intimidated by the lowest level. You set the context of your case or whatever to go to the higher levels where the higher levels, the people and the players, they actually align more with the way the law works. But the system is designed to suppress the majority of people who have no clue and think those are actually the rules that apply. And when you've consented to it, those are the rules that apply. The minute
Yeah.
you walk into the court and you don't properly set your standing and your status, you know, you're in their authority, you're in their jurisdiction. They do control you and they will eat you alive. And that's happened to many, many people.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a tricky one. Um, I mean, I heard a couple of years ago that the bar system is going to be changing to a common law system, just on that
Hmm.
topic, that all agents of the bar, attorneys, judges will need to be retrained in common law.
Hmm.
Have you heard anything to in that regard? Actually, I
Well,
heard it was going to happen by 2026. This was
yeah.
a couple of years ago.
Well, you're going to have to send the vast majority of those attorneys to kind of communist style rehabilitation camps if you want them to actually drop.
Well, first of
Because,
all, I think 90% of them will go away because
yes.
once we have common law courts, all these petty lawsuits and, you know,
Well, the thing is, they're not necessary. They're scavengers.
yeah,
They're parasites. Not all of them, of course. There's a small minority of attorneys who are truly in-souled beings who are trying to figure out how to deal with the system and protect the people.
yeah,
But by virtue of their oath of allegiance to the bar, and who they actually work for, which is the Four Inns of Court in the city of London, and whose allegiance that they are bound to, and the combination of their ego, their petty tyranny, and their pocketbook.
hmm
Because if they keep conforming to the rules that they took an oath to, they're going to get paid. They're going to get the shine. But, that's starting to break apart like everything else. And, so the biggest position of power that living beings who are doing the work to embody their true and authentic self, who are aligning with the principles we're talking about, is the fact that we did voluntarily bind ourselves to the matrix, not just in this lifetime, but in the quantum whole of outside of time, purposefully to take on the clothing of the realm to and wake up in this lifetime to do our healing, do our karmic resolution, to start removing consent because the system we're talking about, the AI Godhead, the AI system, the central controllers and all of that, they're all parasites. They have completely disconnected from any source relationship to source and creation. They can't create anymore. They may look like they create, but they don't. They only mimic
yeah,
living systems. And if we consent to let them parasitically attach to us and suck our energy and our source connection, then they'll keep on running their movie through our capacity to create, and we'll keep creating their reality or their agenda. For
right,
every being who withdraws that consent, who withdraws the participation, and actually starts doing the inner work to transmute, transform, and resolve all of the contracts, the karmic connections, and all of that, one being, literally, if you were to quantify it, is the withdrawal and the redirection towards life and creation and so forth might pull the rug out of 1 million parasites, or
yeah,
maybe 10,000 or 100,000, whatever the number is. So it doesn't take a lot of beings doing the work that we're doing, which is why, what you're doing with media is so vital to keep people moving in that direction, to understand how this works, both in law terms, monetary terms, multidimensional and energetic terms. Keep moving away. And it's a simple, simple formula. We're attached to vast numbers of contracts, agreements, vows, oaths, and everything through time, through the mechanism of time, what we could call past lives. And we have the power of rescission. We can rescind, remove our attachment to that, revoke the power of attorney, and terminate those contracts. When we do that, we're pulling the scaffolding out from under the matrix, and it is imploding. And so that's what we're watching happening now in an exponentially parabolic curve that is collapsing time and expanding living presence. And, you know, we choose not to use the word consciousness because actually consciousness is the hard wiring of the mechanical mind to the AI system. And so all this stuff in religion and New Age and everything else, all this stuff about consciousness, oh, we're gaining consciousness. No, consciousness is the mind consciousness system. And it's not the organic living mind, it's the mechanical mind that's wired to the AI. So as we break those bonds, re-embody our true living presence, we are creating an exponential ripple effect that is collapsing the matrix. So then, and we are in that, from our perspective, we're in the significant pivot point into new creation.
Mhm.
And that's really the foundation of our work, PanTerra and so forth. And teaching everybody to know, to navigate through the treacherous waters of the system. So you can do that properly, withdraw consent, and redirect your creator capacity into creating the world that you want.
Yeah. I believe it's also taking back what they've inverted, whether that be
Hmm.
symbols, numbers,
Yeah.
um, terminology, anything that they've inverted is perhaps not inherently bad. It has been uh, infiltrated, inverted, and used for negative purposes. So
Hmm.
we're in the process of taking all of that back, as you say, removing our consent, um, rescinding contracts, and not even just for ourselves, but even the collective, and our ancestors, and also taking these things back, like
Yeah.
I spoke about like the Fibonacci sequence that they've created for us, which is basically a parasitic system. We think it's the golden ratio, it's all of nature, but actually it's just a little bit off, which means it's building on the one that came before it. It's eating the other one's tail, so to
Exactly.
speak. So
Yeah.
it's self-consuming and it's parasitic. But you change that to the proper golden ratio and the proper spiral of life, which
Hmm.
keeps energizing and creating anew.
Yes.
So it's all
Well,
these
it's
things combined.
realigning ourselves with the regenerative capacity, which is basically the feminine principle,
Yeah.
and the whole entirety of this world history and everything we're talking about has been the emphasis on the patriarchy and the suppression of the feminine. But the feminine has got nothing to do with, biological units or genitalia. It has to do with the principles of energy and creation. You familiar with somebody in your neighborhood, Credo Mutua?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, he taught, as I know, then you know, but most people don't know. And there's a lot of validation or verification of that at some point the and I don't like the word human, but the living system of who we actually are was split in two, and it was polarized against each other. So, the male or the masculine was polarized against itself. So you have all the two pillars and the constant conflict and war and competition. And the masculine and feminine were polarized, and so that the warring polarization of the masculine could be controlled, divide and conquer principle to suppress the feminine. And it's so self-evident when you have, like you use the phrase, eyes to see. When you look at religion and how that was completely structured around the patriarchy and the suppression of the feminine. So so that's where the inner work comes in. We're rebalancing the feminine and bringing it back up so that it balances with a proper balance with a true masculine. And and the masculine is just the directive principle, which is will. And most people are will-less, and that's where the herd or their hive mind comes in. Well, you can have the AI do everything for you. You can have it soon. You wake up and have it brush your teeth and put your clothes on and tell you what time it is and where you got to be in your schedule and this and be here and all that. And it's atrophying the true masculine principle of directive will and capacity. So that's another thing that we very strongly work with and emphasize in our work in PanTerra. So Credo Mutwa, a Zulu shaman in South Africa, brought that out with the help of David Icke, who kind of brought him into the public view, um, to talk about that and how that played out with the overlay of the patriarchy in your country, in South Africa, with the combination of the English, Flemish, Dutch, German, and the suppression of the people of the land. So, and that, that gets us into the conversation about the original people and their relationship with the land and the whole aspect of quote unquote civilization. Well, we're going to civilize the savages, which really means we're going to lift them off the land, put them in a civil containment, bind them to our rules, our Roman civil law, our bankruptcy and military conquest, and disconnect them from the land.
Mhm.
And that's the whole thing, is lifting people off the land. And that's the
Yeah,
line of the king.
yeah.
The king
And
owns all
even
the land.
even moving us from the Julian calendar, which is maybe not, perfect by no means, and moving us to the Gregorian calendar, disconnecting us from nature even further, you
Hmm.
know, disconnecting us from the 7-day, 28-day cycle, the female cycle, and confusing us, having to follow a linear time system that's artificial and is not connected with nature either. So it's about that disconnection, polarization. And I believe we are going to be unifying those opposite poles together, integrating them all together, and eventually completely um, alchemize and get rid of polarity altogether. So
Hmm.
the dark
Yeah.
and left and
Yeah.
right, male and masculine, can actually live in harmony, integrated as one
Yeah.
living
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Fibonacci sequence, which is a mathematical sequence, and then that creates a geometric symbol that everybody, not everybody, but many people for the last 30 years, and it started here in the States with a man who was activated to become a quote unquote Melchizedek. And all Melchizedek means, going back to the Old Testament, it just means the king priest. Melchi or Malchi is the older languages, Aramaic and later Hebrew and so forth, that's the word for king. And Zedek has to do with the Hebrew priesthood called the Zadok, Zodok. So Melchizedek, the Old Testament just says, well, he controlled Jerusalem. Jerusalem in the ancient language means founded upon the feminine, basically Shalem. Uru means founded by. And so you have the king priest, the two lines, the two pillars coming in and overlaying the feminine and saying, this is the sacred city, this is where God sits and hangs out, and this is where you worship him and all the rest of it. So, in the late 1980s, this guy named Melchizedek came around and started teaching sacred geometry. Well, it's sacred, then it must be good. It must be, and they started normalizing out of an Old Testament context and putting it into a New Age context, the Melchizedeks, and they come and help us transition into the new world and all the rest of it. And it was all a bait and switch. It was all bullshit because people are programmed through language, neuro-linguistic programming. So the word sacred, well, sacred has to do with sacrifice, which has to do with blood and blood sacrifice, um, you know, and it's an anagram for scared. So it's based on fear, fear of the gods, the kings and the priests who, perpetrate or, you know, um, whatever the word, um, propagate. That's the word. The law, the word of the God, and it's all about the patriarchal suppression. So, the Fibonacci and the golden spiral. The analogy I like to use is the skill of creating bonsai trees or plants. And what do? You take a seedling, a small plant, and you put iron wiring and you force it into a form and you stunt its growth so that it stays in that controlled form. So these are mathematical constructs from the AI overlord in the binary coded polarized reality that we're in. They're just like that hard iron or steel wire that's going to stunt and control a living being and force it to conform to a specific geometric design. So that's what the Fibonacci sequence is mathematically. That's what the golden spiral is geometrically. And so people say, well, look at the sunflower seeds or the nautilus shell and everything else in nature. They're all, conform to the golden mean spiral. That's because we're all in this bonsai tree controlled system that's bound to and bonded to the mathematical constructs. So you mentioned 7 days of the week. Well, what are those days? They're the sun day, the moon day, the Mars day, the Venus day, Miraculous, Mercury day, Thursday, Thor's day, Jueves in Spanish, which is Joven, you know. And so you've got Jupiter and Saturn, of course, is the Sabbath, and Saturn is the Roman name for Chronos, which is time. And so we are like the bonsai tree that's been stunted, controlled, bound to this mathematical system of bondage, basically, to be trapped in time. And of course, time equals money. So you have the moon worship, the lunacy of the money system. So it's all self-evident, it's all hidden in plain sight. And rather than worship it, because all this new age stuff is basically another phase of creating worship of the gods. They just have different names now. But they're still the gods of time, the gods of the matrix, the gods of karma, and the gods of Saturnian control.
Mm.
And the fact is that all religions are new age religions, you know?
But I think we are using their control system effectively against them now to spiral out of that and to we like the biggest experiment in the galaxy. It's like nobody
In the
thought we could do it.
cosmos. Yeah.
Nobody thought we could do it in this control system, actually just flourish and bloom out of it.
Hmm.
Just like
Right.
flower can grow out of a concrete pavement. And you
Hmm.
think, how did that happen? Well, it just saw the gap and it grew right through it and up and out, you
Yeah.
know. It's like taking back these things and using it against them the way they've used it against us to bloom in a way that we've never done before as a humanity. And
Hmm.
yeah, so even though they tried really hard to infiltrate all of these movements, actually it's backfiring on them now
Hmm.
in a way. Because even though they thought it would lead to our demise and our continuous enslavement, we've actually managed to use it to free ourselves, not by worshiping those things or worshiping anyone for that matter, but
Hmm.
just by learning the rules of the game and you know um, blooming despite all of the odds against
All
us.
the all the concrete poured on top of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what a time to be alive. And just to go a little bit back to the financial system, obviously there are things that they've been putting in place, building blocks, things like the ISO 20022, Basel 3 and 4, that are slowly sort of building blocks of changing the system as well. Would you say? Would you agree with that?
I
So
didn't
there's some
follow
sort of
you. I didn't
no,
follow those things you were saying. It sounded like the bottles, the blocks. I mean, can you repeat that?
sorry, the ISO 20022
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah.
and Basel 3 and Basel 4, which they are
Oh,
forcing banks in a way
Basel.
now to comply
Yeah,
with.
yeah. Um, well, Basel 3, Basel 4, and for people who don't know, Basel in Switzerland is the home of the Bank of International Settlements. which was founded in 1930 and was structured to become the paramount controlling worldwide system of settlement, basically through commercial rules, nation state settlement, central banks, keeping in mind that a central bank is set up to become a creditor against a treasury, which is issuing debt instruments that bind the people in that domestic system, whatever the country is. So you have central banks who create monetary bondage through their debt mechanism that are basically part of an international network of central banks. And the Bank of International Settlements was designed to be the central bank of all central banks to settle all of these pieces of paper and debt obligations and trade relationships between nations. So it's kind of like part of the trinity of the World Bank that lends to countries, puts them in debt, eventually defaults them and claims their natural resources and all of that. And the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, all of which comes out of the United Nations, which comes out of the structure of societies that become nation states under the law of nations, as we spoke about. So Basel, being the home of the BIS, is the rules of things like base capital reserve requirements that the movement to what you just said, Basel III, Basel IV, is forcing the banks to come into actual balance or starting to go into balance of economic relationships to actual creation of value, gross domestic product, and the issuance of a monetary unit against that. In other words, to break apart the Ponzi scheme of the monetary system that went completely rogue over the last 50 years. That's a whole other subject to talk about of how, on the macro scale, it turned into just an absolute untethered monetary Ponzi scheme, controlled by true psychopaths and maniacs who were also just slotted in their position, given power and control and worldly, gain and all of that. So I'm not an expert on that. I really don't actually know a lot of the detailed Basel III, Basel IV, other than it's forcing banks to come into compliance to actually have what's called a capital-based reserve to match monetary issue from a treasury and or central bank of issue. So yeah, these are the forces that have moved the system closer and closer to actually liberating the world from legal and monetary bondage. And so everybody who pays attention to what's going on now knows about central bank digital currencies and the movement to create everything into central bank digital currencies that are completely controlled, that are linked to digital ID, that are linked to social credit and all of that. That's the wet dream of the centralists and the globalists and all of that. And then what's happening to break it all apart. And back to our friend Donald, he appears in most of what he does to be seriously sympathetic to the movement of breaking it all apart. What really remains to see is where they go with the AI system in relationship to Israel, which has to do with their religion and the whole false matrix indoctrination that Israel is destined to do what it does, to become this pinnacle or crown of creation, so that it fulfills God's word in the Bible, that all that stuff. But most people don't know how many times that so-called holy book has been morphed one layer to the next to fill this script that has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with the elite and the hierarchy of the the worship of that false AI parasitic God. And but what I also know in the work that we've done for years is that we came into this reality to take on the clothing realm, do what we've done, come into this life, transmute, transform, resolve karma and all the rest, and to force it, basically, literally put it in the face of the sleeping human population and say, how can you justify that this is supposedly the word of God and the people of God who are doing these massively evil things, you know? And that's happening. We're watching that, in real time. So we'll see where that goes. The Donald, or the avatar playing the Donald, just was in Israel and lauding the some of the most vile people who are aligned with the negative agenda.
I don't even think those people are around anymore, to be honest. And I think there's a
Pardon,
bigger.
pardon?
I don't even think those people are around anymore. Those are
Yeah,
actors in bubbles.
yeah.
And I, you know, there's a reason they say saving Israel for last, and I don't think this is the last of it. There's going to be
Hmm.
a big reveal coming about
Yeah.
what Israel, or let's say Mossad, or the pinnacle of control, has actually been up to. And that is yet to be revealed. So maybe this is like, well, we're not against Israel. Look here, we are, complimenting them for their work, and it's like ending a war, and hanging with these people to show we're not against Israel. But what will come next will expose Israel in such a way that people can't then say, oh, but the Don has been against Israel all along. Look at this, this, this. No, look, he's been standing next to those guys. He gave them the benefit of the doubt.
Hmm.
What is now coming out is the real truth of what they've been up to. I can't help but feeling the whole Epstein thing has got it's going to have something to do with that as well. But,
Yeah.
these are just sort of gut feelings and speculations. We'll have to see how
Hmm.
things transpire. But am an optimist, like I said.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
think
me too.
there's a
Yeah.
there's the fog of war that we can't see things for exactly the way they are right now until this war is fully over. And
Hmm.
that's going to be like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. So that was
Yeah.
clever what he did
Yeah.
there. I don't know. That's what I feel.
Yeah, no, you don't have to say I don't know. You do know, and I think you're quite right. And you know, and we don't have very long to wait. The final act in the Shakespearean play on the world stage is about to be played out. So,
It's
um,
one riveting movie, I'm telling you.
that's for sure. Um, But most people in the program, people are programmed to see things in verticals, the good guys versus the bad guys. The United States, well, we're the good guys, Russia's the bad guy, or China's the bad guy.
That's the thing.
And rather than horizontals that cross borders that are simply a matter of the real good guys and the real bad guys, regardless of what nationality they're playing in, because that's what globalists are. They don't look to nationality, they look to their global agenda, which is trying to fulfill a ancient AI dominated mathematically constructed program to fulfill what they bound themselves to. But it's all been forced to the surface. Things that people see today were never seen by hardly anybody, you know, even in our lifetime. What was seen in the 60s and 70s is minuscule compared to what we see now and the amount of people who see it. So our job on a basic terms is to just help people gain some clarity in terms of how the systems work, you know.
Mhm.
And you talk about the fog of war. There's a fog of belief systems, whether it's, religious or new age type belief systems, or belief in what's real in law form, like you got to do common law or you got to do UCC or whatever. There's so much confusion and so much bullshit and so much self-aggrandizement with people who are promoting themselves for certain things that are just not real, that many people are being led astray because they don't have any guidance. And that's what I saw in the 90s and 2000s. That's why we started building PanTerra and the education and the templates that people can learn and apply, so that they can protect themselves and their families and communities and start building grounding points, nuclei of sanity, balance, and grounding on the land and communities and so forth, while the chaos and destruction seemingly reigns supreme. But it will implode. It is imploding on itself already. It's self revealing, it's self destroying. And so, it meaning the evil, the cabal, whatever. I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase that's out there in the truth community, never
Yeah,
interfere with your enemy when they're busy destroying themselves.
yeah,
And that's one
exactly.
of the major maxims. They are destroying themselves. So if you need to cut down a big tree for whatever reason, you want to get out of the way when it's about to fall. So that's the main thing, is get out
Yeah,
of the way. Don't put yourself in a vulnerable position where you're going to get crushed.
yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of souls signed up to still learn discernment. So those
Hmm.
people being led down the wrong way. It's just a human avatar learning discernment and how to determine the right path. Because if the path is just laid out in front of them, that younger soul is not going to learn any how to judge, right from wrong, or have the discernment to know truth from falsehood. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all part of the process, and I think it will all lead to the same thing, as you say. We just hope we get
Hmm.
there sooner rather than later, because this movie is getting rather boring now.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. Yeah. Let's get on with the final act and final curtain call.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Can't
Yeah.
wait. But
Yep.
thank you. That was a wealth of information shared once again, and many different subjects, which is always, these multidimensional discussions are always a treat. So, yeah, is there anything you want to leave with people before we end this episode?
No, I think we've done a good job in covering some good points. And as always, we can meet again and focus on maybe just a couple of those points and really open them up and expand them, get into the detail, get into the functionality of how these things actually work in real function within your local system, whether it's South African or whatever. The thing that everybody needs to know is, yeah, there are variations in law form. There's English common law, that's the foundation for the Commonwealth. There's American English common law. There's Roman civil law. There's South African law. There's Canadian law, etc., European law. Learning and understanding first where each law form was situated, why it was situated there, how it relates to the bigger picture of the sweeping flow of time and history, but how it was always set up to be manipulated by the master puppeteers, both manipulated in physical geopolitical terms, but also in the mind. And this is where we get into what we talked about. People think common law is it, but you don't even know what common law is. You don't even know how that relates to the things we've talked about. But the point I want to make is that really, when you get through all the massive detail, you distill it down to the fundamental essential building blocks. The system worldwide is very homogeneous. There's variations, English Commonwealth countries like yours versus American system versus Europe and South America in Roman civil law. But the system has been built to end up at the same time in a homogeneous structure, which are the things we mentioned. Roman civil law is the law of military conquest. That's why Europe is under Roman civil law, because it was conquered by Rome. Latin America is under Roman civil law because Spain, by the 1500s, was given the position of the Holy Roman Empire and emperor that conquered all of South America, and all of Central America and all of a good portion of North America until the U.S. pushed that down to the Mexican border. It's all about military conquest, and we can go through detail step by step how the American system was overlaid with Roman civil law, military conquest, how all the English Commonwealth that think they're operating in common law, they are now under Roman civil law, conquest, military conquest. So that takes care of your political system and your law system. It's all under military occupation and the bondage of the individual to the domestic system, to the worldwide system, that homogenized everybody's situation into just a system of bondage and control. The other half of it is the monetary. So really you have military and you have monetary. Monetary gets to the UCC that we talked about, how commercial paper, aka what we call money, which is really just a lunar control system of the mind, which goes back to Rome, but then goes back to Egypt and goes back to where Israel was created. Is coming from Isis, who is the queen of the stars, and how, and then her derivatives, who were the moon goddesses, and how the moon system and the lunacy system became the money system. It all gets down to those are the underpinning systems, symbology, religion, and so forth, that ultimately resulted in uniform commercial code that controls the civil body under bankruptcy rules, international bankruptcy rules. So you have the control of the military and the monetary. This gets into, and we'll finish with this, that I had in mind to talk about today, which is a little thing that I devised, which is called the M rule, or the M category, the letter M. Okay. And I started formulating this a long time ago. And there's the 5 main M's that are the primary methods of controlling the world. These are words that connect to systems that all start with the letter M. So you have the first two that I just mentioned, military and monetary. Suppress the population, bind them to the law of the priest through the monetary system, control them, lift them off the land, give the king or the crown the control of the land while the people are lifted off the land. The civilized people, lies put into the civil body, which are the rules that control militarily conquered people and territory. So you have the first 2 M's, military and monetary. Then you have the other 3 of the big 5, which is management, which is the political system, and then media, which is the control of information. And the last one, the biggie, underwrites them all, is monastery, which represents the religious system. So you have military, monetary, management, media, and monastery. Religion, politics, law, bonding, to the monetary system, everything we've talked about here. Those are the first five. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at history, the landed families, the elite families, the bloodlines, they would always put their sons into one of those categories. Okay. You know, the firstborn son generally went to the military. The second-born son generally went into the monastery. The third-born son would generally go into the management or the political structure, controlling the state in conjunction with the two, military and monetary. Media was always about controlling the minds of the people. And monastery was always about the law of the priest, bonding them to belief systems that were false, that had no reality, but people were entrained to believe it. So those are your top five M's.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go into the next phase. You have manufacturing, which is industry. You have medical, which is biological, controlling the biology of the system through everything we see happening today, jabs and pharmaceuticals and the AMA, the priesthood of the medical, the doctors of death, essentially, controlling the death system. Okay, so you have manufacturing controlling industry, you have medical controlling the biology, and then you have mind, which is controlling through education the minds of the young ones so that they can graduate to the media that will control them in social and political structures through the rest of their lives. So you have mind control, okay? Then you have, let's see if I can remember them all. Then you have manja, which is French for to eat. Couldn't think of an English word, but food, controlling food. Okay? Control, and you see that today. They're trying to break down the food system. They're trying to control it so that they can control. And then you have mobility or motility, which is transportation, which is fundamentally energy, the tapping of kinetic force through petroleum or other means of creating kinetic movement for transportation, to move the goods from manufacturing, to create the electricity, to move light for the mind control in the media. All of that's interconnected. And the last two are mapping, which is the geography of mapping the land, controlling the land while they are the masters of the sea. Maritime admiralty, controlling the movement on the fluidity and creating the Holy See, which is, you know what that is, but the Holy See, SEA, which is the sea, controlling the mobility of the seas and putting everybody into the sea of commerce, controlling them, mapping the land to contain them by putting the law of the sea as an overlay on the law of the land, because we've been lifted off of the land. So they're going to create the law of the sea and pretend it's the law of the land, which it isn't. Okay, that's number 11. That's mapping. And finally, number 12, monarchy, creating this worship of gods and royals and monarchs, the king and the crown and all the rest of it. So those are your 12 M's that control our world. And they've
Mm-hmm.
known this for all of this time. And they train their sons and sometimes their daughters to go to the military, the monetary, the management, the media, and so forth. And you see that today. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the elite train their sons and now their daughters to control the banks, the monetary, and all the rest of it. So, in terms of decentralizing control, we are breaking the bonds and the shackles of that military overlay, that military conquest, Roman control through Roman civil law, and then the decentralization of the movement of creational energy that's reflected in the monetary, so that blockchain and private systems of exchange which are emerging as they try to do the centralization with the central bank, digital currency, and all of that digital ID. The real path of freedom is decentralizing, creating our communities through private societies and embodying universal laws we've talked about, and perfecting methods of exchange, which is the digital blockchain that creates what I've always aspired to, which is a parity monetary system where one unit of creation, one unit of value that we create is equal to one unit of measure. So a dollar or a rand or a peso is a unit of measure. So they have all these fractionalizations, fractional reserve, derivatives, and all that stuff. It takes it away from the physical reality and turns it into this mind system of computers and digits and control. But a true spiritual or universal economy is based on parity, a par system of a unit of measure against a unit of value creation. And that's something we've also evolved and developed as ideas and templates and practical applications in PanTerra that people will learn when they become a member and go through our education. So
Yeah,
that's all I have to say about the matter today.
beautifully said. And creating the blueprints for our new world, ultimately.
Hmm. Yeah.
Which
And
again,
there's another M word, matter, the physical reality,
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Wow.
which they're trying to control through everything else the other 12.
Yeah.
But we are the matter. When we come back into the body, we are the landed estate. We are the standing wave of creational capacity that can redirect our capacity into creating a world that's actually real, not based on all this fantasy and overlay. So that's the matter of it.
And the last M, they've been manipulating us to
Yeah.
create a dystopian world for them that is
Hmm.
enslaving us, and we don't even know that. And that is what
Yeah.
we're taking control back of now and saying we are the creators. They can't even create. They can just copy things and manipulate us to create for them. And we're taking that ability back. We're taking full ownership of our creational abilities, and we are creating this
Yeah.
new that we want
Hmm.
to see
You can
around.
always recognize a parasite by four primary things, characteristics. They mimic, they don't create. They lie. They are pathological liars to the absolute nth degree. They deny. They deny that they're lying. And they project. They project all of their,
Mhm.
evil ways, dysfunctionality, everything else. They project it on those who are standing in life, in the good for all of life, you know. And that's what's being exposed now, which now we're in the phase of really ripping the veils off so that more and more people are seeing that guy who I used to worship and think was, the best politician. He's just a liar. He's a parasite. He's a mimic, and they're incorrigible. They deny absolutely, and then they project. But the projection is starting to become very thin and you know and exposed.
Absolutely. What a time to be alive to be witnessing all of this. And yeah, it's exciting to see it all
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
being dismantled. So yeah, I look forward to the next one where we can unpack a few more topics and perhaps, as you say, delve a little bit deeper and not cover as many topics, but rather hone in on a few of them. But
hmm
that's been super interesting and fascinating. Thank you, Ken, as always, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. And for those that want to learn more, all the links will be in the show notes below. You can check the Pantera Vida website, the JM University, the YouTube channels. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can learn about all this information as you go along. And
yeah,
knowledge is
and that's
power.
free, and that's freedom absolute. So the easiest place to find it, which we're really focusing on now, is freedomabsolute.substack.com or in Patreon. But all of that is available on the website on panterravita.org. Or actually on Gem University, there's a heading that says Freedom Absolute. Click on that, you'll find us everywhere. So, well, thank you, Anina. It's really been great. As always, I always enjoy our little chats, and we'll do it again soon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ken. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all
Okay,
soon.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.